Hey guys, Dr. C here. I wanted to make a video today to share with you the resources that have been most helpful to me in learning how to build in a more mold resistant and non-toxic, low EMF style of home build, because I know many of you are researching that yourselves and are trying to find the right resources to teach you that, because it's not something that you would know how to do if you weren't in that industry yourself. And even if you were in the industry, I've already met a number of you who are in the building industry and have gotten sick from conventional builds and are now trying to figure out how to build in a healthier way for people. So, to start off with, I will just say that I think there are many more resources than I have taken advantage of. And if you have additional resources that you found really helpful that you think people should know about, please put them in the comments so that people can find them, because I know that there are more than I have found. Um, to start off with, the least expensive resource that I started with was the book Prescriptions for a Healthy House, fourth edition. So that's by Paula Baker Laporte, who is an architect who specialized in designing and building for people with multiple chemical sensitivities, which she had herself. And, she wrote this series of books really trying to help that population build with non toxic, low off gassing products, so that they could have a safe home for themselves that they could actually tolerate living in. However, as time has gone on, as all of us in the health space have learned, a lot of people with multiple chemical sensitivities, an enormous trigger for them, often the instigating trigger that gives them multiple chemical sensitivities in the first place, is mold toxicity, is being in a water damaged building, because those mycotoxins and other toxins that you can end up being exposed to in a water damaged building, those are often termed the great sensitizers, because they tend to make people highly sensitive to all kinds of smells, chemicals, EMFs, obviously to mold itself, but then also light and sound and certain sensations like tags in clothing and all kinds of things can become sensitivities because of the way that those mycotoxins affect and hypersensitize the brain and especially the limbic system. And so, in her fourth edition, she teamed up with an expert in the mold building and remediation industry to write the fourth edition, and added a bunch of things that were useful to know in terms of how you could build in a more mold resistant way as well. I wouldn't say that it was a comprehensive resource in that regard. I would say it still very much specializes in reducing the chemical components used in the building of the home. However, there were definitely some great tips in there for mold resistance in homes. It's extremely detailed, so plan to study it like a course. If you really want to learn this stuff and you really want to take away a useful amount of information to use in your own build, plan to take notes, or do lots and lots of highlighting and then condense that into some notes for yourself, because it's a lot of information and it's all very useful depending on what level of non-toxic you want to achieve in your own house build. And I love it because wherever possible, they give specific recommendations in the books for specific products to fill certain needs you may have, like for a non-toxic caulk you might need in a bathroom or something like that, or lower toxin options for roofing, all kinds of stuff. So that is really nice, because oftentimes you'll be working with a builder who is perfectly happy to meet your demands, but they don't necessarily have the experience or knowledge about what the non-toxic options are, and it's difficult for them to find out because a lot of these companies don't publish a lot on their website about the toxin levels. And Paula Baker Laporte and her team put in a lot of time and energy into figuring out what these lower toxin options are. And so I really, really appreciate that a lot about her book. The other thing that I think is really useful about her book is that it goes into way more than stick frame housing. A lot of the resources you're going to find out there for building in a less toxic way are really tailored towards building the conventional way, which is stick framing, right? So building with wood. But that's not necessarily the best option if you are trying to build in a mold resistant way. There are ways that you can build in a more mold resistant way with stick framing, but as you've heard me talk about in other videos, it requires an immense amount of attention to detail. And even then, when things go wrong, they go badly wrong. And so it's not my preference for my own home to build that way because my primary goal is to build in a mold resistant way. And so Paula Baker Laporte's book goes into a lot of alternative systems for building, like building with mass walls, such as building with various types of brick systems. I think they go into like adobe and straw bale, which also isn't my favorite option. They talk about Fazwall, which isn't my favorite option. I'm trying to personally avoid cellulose in the walls at all because even things like hempcrete and things like that, they've done studies on showing that if it gets enough humidity or gets exposed to water for long enough, it will absolutely grow mold. And I think that has a lot to do with the cellulose content and mold that's already in the brick. But anyways, she does go into building with mass wall systems, the benefits of building with mass wall systems of various kinds, and I hope she comes out with another book as those mass wall system options expand. But I think that's extremely helpful for those of us who are trying to think outside the box in terms of how we build and not build with wood as our primary material. And so, what else about that book? I also appreciate that book goes into great detail about how to design your electrical and internet systems so that you are minimizing EMFs in your home, because a lot of people who are mold sensitive are also EMF sensitive. A lot of people who are chemically sensitive are also EMF sensitive. A lot of people with mast cell disorders in general seem to be triggered at least somewhat by high levels of EMF. And we actually think that's like the mechanism. Many people think that's the mechanism for how people become EMF sensitive, is that their mast cells become overreactive and the EMFs can trigger that further. And so I personally want to reduce EMF in my house because there are tons and tons of studies now documenting the negative health effects of living in a high EMF environment, regardless of whether you're sensitive. They have really negative impacts on the nervous system, but just in general, our bodies are made of water and we are electric by nature. You know, our bodies transmit nerve signals and all that through electricity essentially in our bodies. And so we, of course, are highly impacted by electromagnetic fields. We know we're impacted by the electromagnetic field of the earth itself. Why wouldn't we be impacted by man-made EMFs? And similar to man-made chemicals, man-made electromagnetic fields are not in frequency ranges and at quantities our bodies are used to. We didn't adapt to them. We didn't evolve for these levels of exposure. And so it makes sense that our bodies also would not do well with them chronically over a long period of time because that's not what our bodies were designed to do. Anyways, that book goes into great detail in what your electrician needs to do to minimize EMFs in the build, and I think that's a fantastic resource for that as well. And compared to the other courses and things that I ended up taking for figuring out how to build in a healthy way, this book actually goes into far more detail in that regard, as well as in using non-toxic chemicals. I ended up watching 2 courses about building in a mold resistant, non-toxic, low EMF way, but neither of those people went into nearly as much detail on the chemical front or the EMF front. So let's talk about those courses now, because those were the other 2 major resources besides one-on-one help that I have taken advantage of. Number 1 is Jen Jobart's course. So Jen Jobart is a building biologist, and her company is called Practical Healthy Homes, and her website is practicalhealthyhomes.com. And if you go to learn at the top and then to classes, you will find her classes. She has one on buying healthy land and keeping it that way, how to choose the right piece of land if you haven't yet for building a healthy home. And that topic can go really deep. I have considered making a video on that myself, but I think she goes quite deep into that topic. And then the other one is building a healthy and resilient home. That is the one that she did about building a mold resistant, low EMF, low toxic home. So, in my opinion, this course was the better of the two mold resistant building courses that I took, but they do each have their upsides. So, Jen Jobart's course is pretty detailed. However, it doesn't use a lot of images to learn from. But I personally am a visual learner, and it would have really helped me in certain instances. I didn't really understand what she was trying to say about a few things. But in general, it goes into great detail about everything from the foundation all the way up about how to do it. And this is primarily if you are going to try to build a healthy home in a stick built fashion. So she is a big proponent of building in what was called by somebody the perfect wall system, I think. And Matt Reisinger has called it building a monopoly house. And so basically, they are a big fan of continuous insulation on the outside of the framing, so outsolation, and so that you don't have thermal bridging where basically you have framing in between the insulation, and as a result you end up getting condensation in the walls. So this whole system of using outsolation is trying to prevent condensation from occurring in the walls into that area behind the drywall and where the framing is. So that's how I understand it. Again, I'm not an expert in that system because we're not building in that way, but it does make a lot of sense to me that if you are building in a stick built fashion, that would be the way to go if you're trying to do it for mold resistance purposes. So you can get kind of an introduction to that system through some of Matt Reisinger's videos on YouTube. But you're not going to learn anywhere near as much as you will learn from Jen by taking her course. So I think her course is excellent. And I actually learned a lot about how to properly do the foundation and some principles about how to appropriately do the roof system, windows and doors, all those kinds of things that are going to translate that we are still going to be doing, even though we're using a different wall system. Not all of them translate perfectly. There are details that have to be done differently if you're going to do a mass wall system like we are, or a masonry wall system, but definitely got some great principles in terms of like how to properly do the foundation for optimal waterproofing of that and drainage and things like that. So really, I do recommend her course. I think it's very much worth taking. And on top of that, Jen herself is an excellent consultant. Granted, she is not really able to advise very well on mass wall systems and the detailing related to those. She's really an expert in, again, this sort of monopoly framing stick built home, but she's an expert in how to do that in the most mold resistant way, low EMF, low-ish toxin. I think that the toxin part is a little bit less her focus, but all of those things she's able to advise on quite professionally. And she's a rather affordable consultant in this space, actually. So I really think she's doing a great service to this community. And if you are looking for more direction and help, I think she's a fantastic resource. I think she does want you to buy her course before you consult with her, which makes sense because there's just way more detail in there than you can ever get through one-on-one work with her, and it will save you a lot of money by doing it in the course format first. So I only had one video consultation with her, but then she was happy to continue consulting for me via email. And we did hit some walls in terms of she just didn't know how to advise me on certain things that were related to the mass wall system and, air sealing of that with my unusual roof I was trying to use, and windows and doors and all that kind of stuff. She just doesn't have the experience with the mass wall system. So just know that if you're going with a mass wall system, she may not be able to help quite as much as if you're going to build stick frame in a mold resistant way. That being said, she answered some EMF related questions for me and some questions about material sourcing. And that was another thing I really liked about her course, is that where possible, she also referenced products, not quite as many or in as much detail as prescriptions for a healthy house, but some of the most important products you need in the build, such as the vapor barrier you need under the foundation. She has a very strong preference in that regard in terms of what brand you go with and mills and all that, because she researched it really intensely and found that there was a clear winner. She and Matt Reisinger agree on that particular product. She was really into a particular sheathing product and a couple of other things. So some of the most important products for your build, for waterproofing and mold resistance purposes, she did reference specific products. So that I found really helpful. And then I did take her competitors course, Cheryl Ciecko, and that was really helpful in different ways. Jen's course was a little bit more geared towards what should you do with your house, and Cheryl's was a little bit more geared towards what you should not do, in my experience. However, the advantage of Cheryl's course was that she used a lot more images, and she used videos with detailed diagrams and things like that, and lots of links to additional resources so you could research that topic further and get more detail on it. So I found that really helpful as a visual learner. There were certain things that probably wouldn't have sunk in or that I would have needed to find images of for that to understand, and Cheryl provided those. So I think that's a great resource as well. Hers is also geared towards stick building. She doesn't really talk about the monopoly framing thing. She's even going more traditional with stick frame housing than Jen in terms of her course. But she does go into a lot of detail about, how to waterproof your bathroom correctly and wall system and everything. So I think that's a good resource as well. I did also have a consultation with Cheryl, and she also did not have any experience with mass wall systems. She hadn't even heard of some of the ones that have been around a long time, like Faswall, which is what we originally thought we might build with before we heard that Faswall houses are actually not testing well in terms of mold. But anyway, she hadn't even heard of that or really any of the other ones we brought up. And she really had a lot of concerns about us building in a way that wasn't stick frame. She just seemed generally very nervous about it and had a lot of questions and a lot of concerns and a lot of, are you sure? And what are you going to do about this? And how are you going to prevent that? And yeah, for us, that didn't feel like the right fit. We were looking for somebody who had more experience with that and could really give us more of the how to as opposed to just concerns. And so the final consultant that we have worked with who's been extremely helpful has been EcoNest. EcoNest has several architects that were hired by Paula Baker Laporte, who wrote the Prescriptions for a Healthy House book. And like I said, their architecture firm has specialized in helping people with multiple chemical sensitivities. They started with that, and then they've kind of branched into helping people build in more mold resistant ways as well in the most recent years. The architect that I've gotten help from there has been, I think, the most helpful one-on-one consultant, because we are doing a mass wall system, which they have tons of experience with. They have helped people build all kinds of different houses with mass wall systems. And so they're able to speak to more of the detailing of how to do that appropriately. In addition to that, they've been able to help me source a lot more products than some other people have that are appropriate for our build. In many cases, I was trying to source the right products to just send to the builder and be like, "Hey, I want to use this product because it's recommended as the best non-toxic option," and that's their specialty, right? That's what they've been doing for decades, is collating all of that information about the best non-toxic options. So when we first started working with EcoNest, the first thing they wanted to do, or that they agreed to do for us, was provide us a kind of a manual to give to our builder that had their recommended products and procedures for each aspect of the build. Now, this wasn't yet tailored to our build because we hadn't finalized our plans yet at that time, but it was just a way for us to kind of get a contract going, because EcoNest recommends that you put into the contract some terms about not smoking on site and using particular chemical products, and they want it in the contract that you will only use, the builders will only use certain cleaners and all those kinds of things so that you avoid chemical contamination of your build as it's taking place. And so they provided us with a document with all those kinds of things, in addition to product recommendations for most typical aspects of a house. And that thing was 50 pages long and has been a really helpful resource as well as we've gone along. So those are great resources. In addition, I have also found Jen Jobart's group to be really helpful, her group on Facebook. It's just kind of one of those places I've found where everyone in the group is just really interested in building in a healthy way. Most of those people in the group are going to build in Jen Jobart's fashion with stick framing, but not all of them. And people are discussing all kinds of alternatives in there, from various modern forms of concrete block and metal buildings and all kinds of other things, which I hope to make a video on eventually because I've also looked into some of those. But if you have questions that you would like some people's feedback on who might be further along in the journey than you, or you want to see other people's experiences with building in this way, that could be a good place to go. It's called Beyond Build Defects, Building a New Healthy Home. So that's a Facebook group that you can join, and then you can ask all kinds of questions. Usually Jen will not answer unless it's something that she has some significant experience with. And, Jen has built her own healthy home using the Monopoly house method. And so she has a lot of experience with building in that way and personal experience. So she'll chime in with things that she has a lot of personal experience on. But in general, you'll get a lot of good comments and experiences from other people in the group who are building their own healthy homes in a variety of different ways. So I hope that helps you get started with your own research and having some resources of some other people to talk to and to get questions answered with. If you have other resources that I haven't talked about today, please put them in the comments so other people can benefit from them. Take action and go and this is a big topic. Buy or try or look at any of them yourself. I have put many details and minutia that have to be figured out for it to be done optimally, and there are many different ways to do it. So having more resources is always better than having less. And ideally, you go deep into those resources before you ever even start the process, because you will find that there is so much more you don't know than you even realize. And once you get started going down the rabbit hole with these resources, that's what you'll find out. And then you can get educated before you get to the point where you're stressed because you're halfway through the process and you realize you did everything wrong, right? We haven't done that, but we definitely got through certain phases of design and then started working with the builder, and I was still learning even during that time, and coming back to the builder and being like, actually I want to do this like this, and he'd be like, oh well, that's non-standard and we have to price that differently, and so the more information you can have up front about how you want your build done to be able to hand to the builder, the better. And then you can get a more accurate quote, and you can talk through the problems that they see with that or whatever early on, so you're not crunching your timeline for the build. If you are looking to follow up on any of these resources and take action and go and buy or try or look at any of them yourself, I have put links in the description box below to make that easy for you. All right, I will see you in the next episode, and thanks for watching.